All right, so let's talk a little bit about innovation in hip hop. And obviously, it'll be a pretty tall order to go back to the beginning all the way to present day. However, what the heck? We'll give it a shot, right?
Yeah, let's go for it.
All right. So, and we haven't prepped. We haven't had a conversation about this. It's really, it's really one of those things that you would think that there should always be evolution in pretty much everything, right? I mean, things should get better with time. So we go back to the beginning. So the beginning of recorded hip hop,
right?
At least professionally released hip hop. We're talking about the Sugar Hill Gang, Rapper's Delight, and we obviously need to include the Fatback Band's King Tim III.
Right.
And we have both disco and funk with rapping on it.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, those were the first quote-unquote rap records. And they were essentially an evolution of funk, disco. And as we moved on, obviously there were all other types of genres added to the mix.
Exactly.
What would you say would be the next step in that, something that broke the mold next? I would say Planet Rock.
Oh, yeah.
Because that was the electro.
Exactly, yeah.
Synthesizer, electro vibe, clearly influenced by Kraftwerk, which was a kraut electronic rock band, obviously German. But it was interesting, if you think about them, how much that sound was prevalent in urban radio at the time. So you have the sound from the other side of the planet. And I mean, that was, I guess that was electronic music and rock music kind of merged together, right?
Yeah. I think in a lot of ways it was probably even inspired by the punk scene. Even there was a lot of that, except that, I mean, it wasn't really electronic based,
right?
But it had that kind of rebel attitude to it.
Definitely, there was always a synergy in those early days between, punk music and hip hop, even though it wasn't necessarily, visually obvious or even sonically obvious, but there was definitely that kinship in certain circles,
right?
And we saw that obviously with people like Malcolm McLaren.
Oh yeah,
who was the manager for the Sex Pistols, and we had his record, which was Buffalo Gals. Even though I don't know, I mean, people wouldn't really consider that hip hop, right? But it was definitely accepted,
right?
And you had the Supreme
world famous
team,
Supreme team, yeah,
the world famous Supreme team on that. So. I mean, there you go. That's another connection to punk. Didn't Bambaataa do who did he do a punk record with? Was it Johnny Rotten? Or was it
with Johnny Rotten? Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely that kinship was there early on. And then in many ways, if you think about it for a minute, early 80s, when we had The Clash.
Right.
And The Clash incorporated rap into their Magnificent Seven record, which I think that might have been 81.
I believe so. Something, yeah, it was around that time.
81.
Yeah.
So, so you had a lot of things kind of brewing and happening at that time. So what would you say what was the next milestone in the evolution of hip hop music? We had the Melly Mel's and the Grandmaster Flashes that also were groundbreaking.
Oh, right. I mean, Melly Mel, what he did was just beyond amazing for its time.
In introducing a lot of the social elements early on. And I think that is where that kinship to punk kind of begins early on, with the statements about the state of society and injustices. So in many ways, that was an innovation, right? So we went from the party to
social commentary.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And that happened fairly quickly. And also between the Sugar Hill Gang and Melly Mel, it became more sophisticated lyrically.
Right.
And obviously, Run DMC brought it a step further stylistically,
Right.
I think.
Okay, after all of those genres, then it moved right into rock.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like that. And
Yeah.
that was obviously Run DMC.
Run DMC.
And that was Rockbox.
Exactly.
Off of their first
Now
album.
Walk This Way. Rockbox.
Indeed, off of their first album with live guitars. It
Right.
wasn't a sample. And do you remember the name of the guitarist?
I was just thinking about Eddie Martinez. I believe that's his name. I think so. I think it's Eddie. I think it's Eddie Martinez.
So I have the record literally within arm's reach, but I'm gonna stick with that. I can literally point to it. So then we had this introduction of rock, and not just rock, like hard rock. All right. So then what would you say would be the next step? So, and again, this discussion isn't necessarily about, every group or every artist that had a significant impact. But when it comes to innovations, I think then if that's the case, we have to talk about, and this may not necessarily be chronological, although it kind of is around the same time. Obviously we're talking mid-'80s. It has to be Rakim.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he completely revolutionized just the way lyricists rhyme in general.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. So he was the one, I think, that in many ways introduced a
Rhyme
complex
patterns, yeah.
rhyme delivery that to this day
People emulate.
has influenced.
Yeah.
So many artists, whether they realize it, whether they know it or not. But in many ways, I mean, he set that bar. And he set that bar, I think in many ways, crazy. It's like too high.
Right.
Because you literally went from, this very simplistic rhyme pattern that you heard in some of the earlier Sugar Hill Gang stuff, not to demean it. I mean, this was the beginning.
Right. It was good for the time. I mean,
Right.
it was the introduction.
And then, of course, in that world, we had people, just groundbreaking, iconic artists like KRS-One and Big Daddy Kane.
Right.
Around that time, or maybe right before that time, we had Tila Rock.
Yeah.
And
Tila Rock was the first one to really
if you think about
break
it,
through
yeah.
with the complex rhyme styles
True.
and the vocabulary.
Indeed.
And, yeah.
Indeed, another unsung hero, I think, of hip hop. So,
Yeah.
I mean, in many ways, that was innovation.
Right.
Right. So then where do we go from there? It would have to be Mantronics.
I didn't even think about Mantronics, yeah.
It would have to be Mantronics because Mantronics took that electro vibe to a different level, the electronic vibe to a different level with the use of, not that those drum machines weren't used before, but the exploitation of a lot of different rhythms
Right.
and also tempos with the 808s and the 909s. And incorporating that into a wide variety of singles at the time outside of, the group Mantronics. But DJ Mantronic, I would say in many ways, he was the next step in the innovation of
Oh, definitely. Definitely. And yet he's so underrated, too.
Yeah, nobody talks about
Yeah.
it. Nobody talks about Mantronics, which is crazy stuff. It's just nuts to think about that.
Yeah. The early Just Die stuff, it's just amazing. Yeah. Even going beyond the group itself. Him and MCT.
No question about that. Yeah. I mean, he did Tila Rock.
Tila Rock, right? I mean, you have to mention someone like a Cool G Rap was also around that time.
Yeah, no question about that. G-Rap, definitely.
G-Rap was just incredible.
Lyrically, I think he came more into his own in the 90s, right? In the early 90s. I mean, he was definitely in the mix, but he became more groundbreaking when he
As he
really
progressed,
dove
as the years went on,
into that street element.
Right.
And really became New York's first gangster rapper.
Yeah.
So then obviously when we talk about gangster rap, at the time, it was a significant innovation because it was something we hadn't heard before.
Exactly.
And we would, of course, be speaking about
Schoolie D.
Schoolie D from Philly. And by the way, for those folks that are listening, if you have not heard the Schoolie D interview with Insomniac,
you got to definitely check that out.
Yeah, you definitely got to check that out. We really dig deep. And since I'm on that note, then you also have to go to Chris Schwartz, who was his manager. Yeah. You got to listen to that interview as well. So if we're going to talk about, going down a further rabbit hole, definitely go down those rabbit holes. That's some real hip hop. So we had this East Coast gangsta rap introduction with Schoolie D, and then a little bit later with G-Rap. And then, of course, NWA was probably the most significantly recognized. They really broke through, right?
Yeah.
Because Schoolie D, I mean, as much as a mainstay as Schoolie D's Gucci Time and PSK were in hip hop, those records at the time,
they weren't mainstream,
right? They didn't really. I mean, not that NWA was mainstream, but
right. But eventually,
right. But NWA really just broke super wide,
right.
And a lot of that obviously had to do with some of the
controversial elements,
right? Exactly. That was the show part of it, right? Like the theatrics,
right?
The theatrics. And then, of course, we have to talk a little bit about, or a lot about, Public Enemy.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So Public Enemy literally took maybe some of the things that we might have heard or some of the things that were touched on early on by Melly Mel. And then brought it, put steroids on it. And it wasn't just about, telling the story. It was about bolstering a message.
Right.
That message of revolution, which again, that connection to punk music. But there was something else about Public Enemy that was innovative, right? And that was the sound.
The sound was completely innovative. It was just it seemed like they threw everything into a blender and mixed it up, and somehow it just came out sounding incredible every time.
And I think in many ways, another connection to punk, because if you think about punk early on, even back with the Stooges, it was about like a wall of noise. And that's what PE was. I mean, granted, the noise was being made in a different way.
Right.
But they were, pun intended, bringing the noise. And it was a wall of noise. All these sounds, just raining on your eardrums as Chuck's booming voice, blared through the speakers, almost like a bullhorn.
Yeah.
And then obviously, conversely, the fun, wild, rambunctious Flavor Flav.
Oh, yeah.
To kind of balance out.
Ad-libs and everything. Yeah.
Indeed. But also obviously balancing out that really serious element that we heard from Chuck D. So, groundbreaking. All of that was groundbreaking. Maybe we have to back up a little bit. Now that I think about it, we didn't talk about the Beastie
Boys. That's who. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the Beastie Boys obviously back. It's crazy. Back to punk. Originally a punk act.
Right. Exactly. Right? Yeah.
And in the way that they kind of came across, maybe they were trying to emulate Run DMC, or they were trying to channel Run DMC, but they really came off.
Yeah.
They came off punkish.
Right.
The way that they kind of threw themselves around on stage. They were B-boys, but the way that they kind of, had that flair of just like a little bit on the, sloppy side.
Right. I mean, it was really just about having fun.
Yeah.
You knew that they loved the music. But for them, it was about having, and that was a smart way to approach it too. Because initially, you see the Beastie Boys and you just think, okay, well, these guys are going to be clowns or whatever and stuff, but they were brilliant clowns, if you want to say that. They could play instruments, which we found out later on, And, they definitely had skills on the mic.
With them in the mix, I think we definitely now have missed some of the dots that connected them, and that was obviously Rick Rubin.
Rick Rubin, yeah.
So from Run DMC to Public Enemy to the Beastie Boys to Tila Rock. I mean, that was all Rick Rubin. Yeah. Rick Rubin had such a significant hand. And I think because of him, that bar, that's, I think, in many ways why that bar was set.
Exactly.
Even lyrically now with LL Cool J.
Right.
Who was produced by Rick Rubin. That really is the benchmark for creativity in the genre and evolution in the genre. So it really was about Rick.
Yeah, I mean, I remember talking to Bill Adler at one point, and he mentioned that Rick's intention was to give each group emerging from Def Jam, Rick and Russell, each group their own distinctive image, something to set them apart from other acts out there. And they definitely did that. I mean, if you look at, and I think we discussed this before in a prior podcast about how if you look at a Beastie Boys or a Public Enemy, Run DMC, they weren't on Def Jam, but just look at all of those groups and they're so distinctive from each other.
And now, again, in that same lineage, we're talking about the Def Jam family, and also we're talking about innovation in hip hop. Then so many giants, Slick Rick. Yeah, Slick Rick.
It, yeah.
So many giants. Yeah. Again, the delivery was not quite what we were used to.
Right. The English accent?
Laid back.
Whoa, what was that about?
Yeah, it was British accent. Yeah. It was laid back. It was clearly story-driven. It was comical, but not clownish.
Right.
It was stylish. And it also had a party element to it. Obviously the show. And clearly a big part of that was Dougie Fresh.
Dougie Fresh, right.
Another innovator in the genre. I mean, I think in many ways the quintessential.
He's like a hip hop renaissance man in a sense. Yeah. He's someone who it doesn't matter what decade, it doesn't matter. He's someone that you can always throw on stage, and whether he rocked the stage then, and then he could still do it now, and people would love to see him.
And that's the fascinating thing about him, right? And
true
that was
entertainer.
And in many ways, that was the essence of early hip hop,
right?
The party hip hop, was the MC, the DJ, and in many ways, he continues to be an example that of evolution, because as you said, he hasn't, even though musically, or let me rephrase that, even though as far as recorded music, we really haven't seen a lot from him, right? But he doesn't go away. He is the quintessential stage man of hip hop, and that's, I think, what I was looking for.
Exactly. And I'll see. You'll see bands and they'll just call Dougie Fresh on stage to do stuff with them. I mean, remember a few years back, Prince would always call Dougie Fresh on stage to do something with them. It's amazing. He can just fit in any realm of any genre and just bring him on, and he'll just rock the show.
In regard to innovation, would you put the Fat Boys in that discussion?
But yeah, they were definitely innovative for their time. I mean, it was mixing. You didn't really find that much as far as humor.
The Fat Boys, I think their innovation was not taking themselves too seriously. A lot of people took themselves very seriously for good reason, but they didn't.
Right.
And it worked.
Right. I think Charles Stetler had a lot to do with that, because initially they wanted to be like everyone else. They were the Disco 3 and we're going to rhyme hard.
True.
But Charles Stetler knew how people perceive them. Right. And just brought that out on record and said, you guys aren't the Disco 3 or the Fat Boys. And that's what worked for
them. That was Tin Pan Alley.
Tin Pan Alley, yeah. Yep.
And by the way, as a side note for those folks that want to dig a little bit deeper, if you haven't, see Crush Groove, because Crush Groove is, I would say one of the greatest hip hop movies of all time.
Oh yeah,
and it tells that story. I mean, granted, you have some of
your
the
cheesy elements in
Hollywood,
there, of course.
Hollywood.
We know what that is too. You know what the Hollywood elements
right,
are.
Right.
You'll know what
you'll know
right
it. You'll
away.
know it. But in many ways, it is kind of the loose. It's a lot tighter than loose. It's a story of a lot of those groups.
Yeah,
including Rick Rubin, including the Beastie Boys, including Run DMC, and the Fat Boys.
Right, they took over the movie, basically.
And you get to see, and how did we
Kurtis
not
Blow.
discuss Kurtis Blow?
Right, yeah.
Kurtis Blow, in many ways, I think, was that bridge between that funk,
R&B, I would say.
R&B,
yeah,
R&B and hip hop.
Right,
but he was hip hop, no doubt. He was. He was the ultimate MC, but he presented himself, especially early on. If you go to YouTube and you watch videos of him, like on Soul Train,
yeah,
I mean, he is so debonair, right? He's dapper, and he does exude that super cool R&B vibe of that time, like real R&B. Even though he was hip hop, but the sound, a lot of his sound had R&B elements, I would say, early on.
I'm sure that helped a lot for bookings anyway, I mean, it's the kind of thing where, okay, well, he's the safe rapper.
Yeah.
Someone we can book and not
Would
worry
you
about
say he
anything.
was one of the first crossovers because Christmas rapping, right?
Yeah, which was a huge hit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he might have been one of the... And speaking of crossovers, we can't leave the 80s. We really can't. We're going to have to do a part 2 because we can't leave the 80s. So, Houdini,
yeah. I mean, you're talking about merging R&B and hip-hop.
But it was still hip-hop. It was still rap.
Right.
And it was good rap.
It was good, yeah.
It was sophisticated rap. It was upwardly mobile rap. To this day, those records are still
hold up. Yeah.
relevant.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a one-off or a two-off. Like, they had a string of impactful, distinctive records that felt very adult, right? But not in a cheesy way, not in an old way, in a mature way, right? It was, in the same way that Run DMC was street, they just felt like they might have been, I don't know, how would you describe that?
They were like the suave R&B cousins to Run DMC.
I like that. But it's also kind of not fair to say R&B because they weren't R&B.
Right.
They had some of the R&B stylings
elements,
in their music, but they were rappers.
They were rap, yeah.
And they were rappers. And they had the scratching element.
Right.
So yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing. But again, I think that says so much more about them, that there was something about them that you knew was different and made them one of a kind. To this day, we've never had a Houdini.
Yeah, exactly.
We've never had another Houdini.
Exactly. And they're really not as credited as much as they should be.
They're not. No way. No way about that. I don't know. Maybe they probably do. If they probably have what's the name of that show?
An unsung.
Yeah, they have to have an unsung.
I think they probably did.
They have to have it
from
unsung.
what I remember. Yeah.
Yeah. If it's out there, look it up, because if you don't know Houdini, you really should know Houdini.
Yeah.
Because there's never been another Houdini. There have been people that have kind of replaced, in some instances, some of the people we discussed as far as where they brought it. No one's replaced Houdini.
No. We skipped someone very, very important. De La Soul. And you talk about innovators.
De La Soul were... So they're still unsung, really.
Yeah.
I mean, people know De La Soul, but they're still unsung.
Yeah.
De La Soul, at first, had that flower thing going on, which really wasn't who they were.
No.
They were super soulful. They incorporated, I don't know,
they were the
psychedelic.
first group. Yeah, the first group to introduce skits to hip hop. No one was doing that before. As opposed to sampling James Brown like everyone else was doing at the time. They said, no, we're going to sample everyone.
Right. Didn't they have like 60s psychedelic rock and stuff? Yeah.
Turtles, Hall and Oates, and they would just jump all around. Everyone was sampled. I mean, nothing was off limits for them, and it was incredible.
And the delivery was also very different.
Yeah.
So De La Soul,
And then right on their heels, of course,
Tribe
Called Quest. Yeah.
Tribe.
Well, by incorporating all the jazz into there.
But Tribe was 90s, though.
Yeah, it must have been 1990. I think it was 1990 was the first album.
I mean, another voice that is not only timeless, but one of a kind.
Yeah.
Q-Tip. No one
Sounded like
there was
him.
no Q-Tip that high pitched. And lyrically, stylistically, they were monsters.
Yeah.
And also a departure from, some of the more street, the harder edge stuff that we might have been used to, but still realer than the realest.
Right.
First album was.
I felt like the first three were flawless.
That was was probably some of the best hip hop ever made.
Yeah. We're also talking about innovators. Are we going to mention female MCs?
Of course.
So, I mean, then you just jump around from, Salt and Pepper to the Queen Latifahs and MC Lights.
So we're back in the 80s. We can't leave the 80s.
We can't leave the 80s. We're
Oh,
stuck.
my goodness.
We're stuck.
We cannot leave the 80s.
We're stuck.
The 80s.
Trapped in the 80s.
Trapped in the 80s. So, Queen Latifah.
Who brought the whole Afrocentric.
True. Definitely something that we hadn't seen before. MC Light.
She was as rough as the guys, as hardcore as the guys. Which I guess you could say we saw a little bit of with Roxanne Shante.
Sparky D.
Antoinette with MC Light.
Sparky D was definitely hard-edged.
Sweet Tea, people like that, yeah. I guess you could say Salt and Pepper, they were the first ones to make it pop.
Yeah, Salt and Pepper definitely were radio-friendly.
Oh, yeah.
They were more polished. And those records were made to be hits.
Right.
Herbie, right?
Yeah. Herbie Lovebuck. Yeah.
Those records were made to be danceable.
And they had their street joints on those records too, but it's just the ones that people remember most are the Push Its and tracks like that. My mic sounds nice, things like that. Yeah.
All right, so then talk to me about EPMD. It was a duo in hip hop. We've seen that before at that time.
Well, they were also, that was another group who they took soul and funk especially, and then they would just flip it. They would rhyme over that, and they had a more laid back style, which I remember, at the time, not being able to compare them to anyone else. People used to say, well, it's like two Rakims. But yeah, they had the laid back style. That's all that people knew about them, because the only person doing that laid back style was Rakim at the time. So it was like, okay, well, yeah, these guys are doing it too, and funk is their thing. And then, of course, they had the branding. Everything was business.
And that was definitely something that was distinctive. That the theme.
Right.
There weren't a lot of artists other than PE that had a theme.
Right.
To what the albums were about.
And Eric Sermon was distinctive because he had that lisp. You never really heard that before. True. So that was a unique vocal style, even though that was him.
Right.
You know, it wasn't like he was doing his style, but yeah.
So if that's the case, but the person that we didn't talk about was Biz Markie.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Biz was just pure. It was just all about fun with Biz.
But he also had
his own unique,
Yeah, I don't know if it was a lisp. I was trying to figure out what it's not a lisp, but he had a different...
vocal style.
Yeah.
His sound, his vocals sounded different. He was humorous. He was another artist who, I mean, you knew when you were going to listen to a Biz Markie song, it wasn't going to be some deep, meaningful kind of track. It was all about fun, but it was great. It was great hip hop.
Indeed, because you have some records that are like, like if you think about a record like the Rapping Duke, right, which was at least a big urban hit, urban radio hit. it was very jokey. You didn't take it seriously.
Right, not at all.
And that's the thing. I mean, you liked it, you enjoyed it, you could make fun of it.
Right.
But you didn't take it seriously. No. Biz Markie was fun, but you took him seriously.
Right. He's someone that you would actually want to go see his show and go, okay, yes, I'm going to check out a Biz Markie show, and it's cool to check out.
He was the real deal.
Right. You couldn't check out a Rappin' Duke show.
He was the real deal. And the other thing is...
And he had production from Marley Marl.
Right, there you go. But then the other thing is that in many ways, he brought something that didn't exist into the ecosystem. Because we didn't have anybody like that.
No.
We didn't have anybody that was, coming left.
Right.
Right. And also...
He would do a true show. He would dance on stage. He was doing the beatbox.
DJ.
Yeah. Yeah. He would do it all.
And it wasn't an act.
Right.
That was the other piece of it. Like, there was definitely this authentic... You got a sense that was the real deal.
Right.
You had some people that you could tell they were putting on shtick. But with him, you just felt that was him. Biz. That was Biz.
Yep. I mean, if you want to go beyond what PE was doing, you want to add to that and maybe take it to the next level, you could mention someone like X-Clan.
Yeah, X-Clan was a more Afrocentric
version of PE. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Ultra magnetic. All right, so ultramagnetic MCs. So they had a lot of the elements sonically that we heard with, the sampling and the James Brown.
Right.
But there was something different going on. Talk to me about that.
Okay, and you would have to say that the difference resided in one man or one alien. I'm still not sure. And that was the great Kool Keith.
Yeah, I mean, he was a showstopper. From the beginning, he was a showstopper. You never quite knew what he was saying or talking about, but you knew you loved it. And that, I mean, talk about innovation. I mean, just bringing a whole new world lyrically into hip hop, and literally a whole new world.
Oh, yeah.
With all of the scientific jargon and just off kilter. But it was always fly. It was always like, even if you didn't know what he was talking about, you were with him.
Oh, yeah.
The whole time.
Oh, yeah.
Ultramagnetic MCs, in many ways, if you think about them, they kind of had, musically, they kind of had some of that Rakim-ish type, Eric B production with...
I thought they were actually tighter.
Right.
A lot tighter. I mean, Said G was incredible.
True. But I was also going to say that some of the elements also reminded me a little bit of PE.
PE, except that they predated PE.
That's true. That is true. Wow, man. I mean, Keith continues to impress.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, you had the noise, those sounds embedded within the fly James Brown-esque beats of the time. Do you remember the one, Traveling at the Speed of Thought?
Yeah.
Was that the Rolling Stones?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
He sampled, I think, Honky Tonk Woman or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, man, that is... Even thinking back now, like, I'm smiling because it was so left field, but it was so on.
Right.
So it's a weird thing to say that you could be so off, but so in the moment. Yep. And I think in many ways, in my opinion, probably their biggest downside, in my opinion, was that they weren't on Def Jam.
Yeah.
I think if they were on Def Jam, because Def Jam was so good with the marketing piece.
Yeah.
I think that their name would be much more ubiquitous than it is now. When you say people like Slick Rick and Run the MC, I mean, they were always on the radio. They were always in the magazines, you know, and it's sad to say, but Ultra was almost like one of those secondary artists from back then.
Yeah, which is
like they were always in the mix. They always had new
Yeah.
stuff. They were never sleeping.
Right.
But I think it was just marketing.
Yeah.
I think because they weren't on Def Jam, they weren't on Tommy Boy, and more so Def Jam, they would just play second fiddle when it came to notoriety.
Right.
You know, even though...
But talent-wise,
No,
they were definitely not second fiddle.
Not at all.
They
No
were,
question about that. I mean, that's a travesty, and that's, you know, that's also the business.
Right.
It's just marketing. If you think about, you know, everyone on Def Jam became, pretty much everyone, there's always exceptions. Everyone on Def Jam became these iconic, you know, idols.
Yeah.
And that was because of that machine. That machine was so finely tuned. And if you weren't on that machine during that era, you were going to
get left
take,
behind.
you know, for the most part, you're going to get, you know, left behind a little bit. I think Rakim was managed by Rush, right?
Yeah, later on, yeah.
Right. So I think that's probably, I mean, granted, they were, you know, it was genius, but they were still part of that machine if they were managed by essentially the same people. But to my knowledge, Ultra was not.
No.
But I think that was probably the only missing element.
Yeah.
You know, I got to ask Keith one day his thoughts about that.
All right, now here's another innovator, and it's definitely not for his rapping,
Okay.
but it's for what happened to him as far as business and what it meant for hip-hop.
Jay-Z, for sure.
Well, that's later on.
Okay.
But this was the first person to really do that and be successful at crossing over into television and film.
Oh, of course. The rapping Prince. The Fresh Prince.
Yeah.
Fresh Prince. Yeah, that is true. That was probably, even though obviously Ice-T
Right.
before him.
With film, yeah.
But it you know, most people
didn't have
didn't
the
recognize
same
it till
impact.
later.
Right.
He didn't necessarily like, you know, didn't go gangbusters, but he was in film. And yeah, you're right. Will Smith was the one who kind of
really broke through.
And
I mean, you had Kid and Play who did it with the films
True, that's
again.
true. That's so true.
Yeah.
Back to the 80s, Kid and Play.
No, they were killing it.
Were in many ways they were the Fresh Prince before the Fresh Prince.
Right.
Even though I would have taken them a little bit more seriously than the Fresh Prince.
Exactly.
And they really just created their own little world with the movies. But even before that in the 80s, I mean, they also had like kind of like that hip club vibe going on. Right. How would you describe them?
I mean, I thought that they were another fun group. They were sort of like the counterparts to Salt and Pepper, the male counterparts to Salt and Pepper. That's the way I looked at them.
They were fun, but they were not
funkier.
Jokey. They were not clownish.
Right, exactly.
They were more like your homeboys.
Yeah, exactly.
They were more like your homeboys versus...
Right. I mean, you didn't look at them as clowns.
Right.
I mean, you're not gonna laugh at Play.
Right.
You know.
Right.
And Kid was cool. I mean, you liked them both. They were fun. They had a distinctive look. Kid had the high top fade.
Indeed.
The real high top fade.
Indeed.
I mean, high top.
MC Searches.
So they were a cool group and everything. I mean, the songs were fun. You know, they had it was funky hip hop. Yeah.
It was funky hip hop, but it also had, I don't know, I'm thinking like a club vibe to it.
Right, because I mean, all of their songs had that dance vibe to
that's
it.
That's true.
And then later on when they incorporated go-go into one of the songs. So yeah, they always had that thing that made you want to dance.
Were they Kid and Play when they did Last Night?
No, they were Fresh Force then.
Right. But it still had the same vibe though.
Still had the same vibe, right. And I think I remember seeing them at the Latin Quarter and they were wearing Yankee baseball caps and jackets. So I definitely remember that.
I really had a ball last night. Maybe that's why I'm...
But it was all funky. It always had that kind of,
like party kind of, but a different level. It also kind of felt newer.
Yeah.
You know, and then you're right. Of course, they killed it in the early 90s with the movies.
Yeah.
I mean, other than, so we had we had Run DMC that had a couple of movies. We had the Fat Boys, and then we had Kid and Play. And Kid and Play were the ones that I think really took it to the next level because they had hit movies,
right? And then they had a cartoon, I think, animated Saturday morning cartoon.
True. The Fat Boys kind of had that one shot, after Crush Groove,
right?
With the Disorderlies,
right?
And that didn't come off well.
No.
That didn't come off well. Run DMC, movie-wise, had Crush Groove, and then they had
Tougher Than Leather,
and that just fell flat.
Yeah.
But these people hit it out the park.
Yeah.
They definitely, had a... It was really, they brought the 90s in, and it almost felt like...
It was something unique and new,
It just felt different. It felt different.
Yeah.
Of course, Robin Harris was part of that magic. The great late comedian. I think you're absolutely right. They are also a significant part of that innovation because of the connection to Hollywood.
Right.
And then, of course, Will Smith took it all the way.
Oh, yeah.
He took it all the way. So he kind of started out, with obviously on TV, but then he took it. I mean, he hit it out the park.
Right. I mean, musically, basically, the group was Jazzy Jeff. At least, in New York, everyone was just talking about Jazzy Jeff. And you didn't really pay much attention to Will. He would do the story rhymes. That was fun and everything. But it was really about Jeff. But then once he crossed over into television and film, then, hey... It was just all about Will.
What was the first record? The first record used the I Dream of Jeannie.
Right. Girls of the World Ain't Nothing But Trouble. Yeah.
And then, of course, later on, I guess the rest is history with Ice-T. Ice-T did a lot of movies.
Oh, yeah.
It's weird how you saw people like Ice-T and even Coolio making movies. I don't know what happened there, but it was interesting.
And they were on the West Coast. I mean, all the studios were over there, so I guess it was easier.
Right.
Easier.
So I think we got to do a part 2.
Yeah.
Because we have not really ventured too deep into the 90s.
Yeah, we haven't left the 80s at all.
With Kid and Play, I mean, I think that took us pretty far out into the stratosphere of pop culture. And really hip hop just branching out into mainstream America.
Right.
And the consciousness of, almost every household. The success of the Kid and Play movies, the house party movies, was what led to Martin.
Oh, yeah.
Really jumping off, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's very true. Yeah. Because, I mean, we were introduced to Martin because of those films. And... people fell in love with the comedian, and there you go. That was sort of like his launch pad for his own series, yeah.
And that he intersects with Will Smith.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was his connection to hip hop too. So it's like, yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed. So I think that right now we've delved deep. You're gonna have to come for a part 2, maybe even a part 3 of this discussion. So I want to thank everybody for checking us out. And by the way, if you haven't checked out the new and improved website, definitely check us out at InsomniacMagazine.com. Make sure that you follow on all of the platforms. If you're a Twitter person or if you're on Instagram, at InsomMag since 96, at InsomMag since 96, and definitely visit the new website and let us know, reach out to us, let us know what you think about innovation in hip hop. Who are some of the innovators that you think really brought things to the next level? And we'll include them in the next, or we'll try to include them in the next edition. Peace.